The Oklahoma sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty shooting range outside Tulsa. It was the kind of heat that made mirages dance on the horizon, the kind that separated the serious shooters from the weekend warriors. Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his position behind the rifle. At 23 years old, he had already earned a reputation at the Heartland Precision Shooting Club, but today felt different. Today, the whispers would either stop or become deafening. The annual Southwest Regional Championships attracted competitors from across the country. Trucks with license plates from Texas, Colorado, and Arizona lined the gravel parking lot. Men in cowboy hats and tactical gear milled around, comparing equipment and swapping stories. But most of the attention centered on one particular technique that had been causing heated debates for months. The barn beam shot, a controversial method that Marcus had perfected during his years working on his grandfather's ranch in rural Nebraska. Instead of the traditional prone or standing positions, the barn beam technique involved using elevated wooden structures as stabilizing platforms. Marcus had learned it out of necessity, taking shots at coyotes threatening the livestock from the barn's support beams. The position allowed for an unusual angle and unexpected stability that defied conventional wisdom. Range Master Bill Harrison stood at the scorer's table, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl. A Vietnam veteran with 40 years of competitive shooting under his belt, Bill represented the old guard. He had publicly called the barn beam shot a gimmick, an insult to traditional marksmanship. Just last month, at the Oklahoma State qualifiers, he had lobbied the board to ban the technique entirely. Marcus could feel Bill's eyes on him as he unloaded his gear. His rifle, a custom-built Remington 700 that his father had helped him assemble, gleamed in the afternoon light. It wasn't the most expensive setup on the range, not by a long shot. Some competitors were shooting rigs worth $20,000. Marcus had maybe $3,000 invested in his entire kit, including the worn leather case his grandfather had passed down to him. Sarah Bennett approached with her camera equipment. A sports journalist from the Tulsa Tribune, she had been following the controversy surrounding the barn beam technique for her column. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her notepad was already filled with scribbles. "You nervous?" she asked, though the answer seemed obvious. "The board meeting is in an hour. If Harrison gets his way, you won't even get to compete today." Marcus took a deep breath, tasting dust and gunpowder residue on the air. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. He had driven 8 hours from his apartment in Kansas City, taken unpaid time off from his construction job, and spent money he didn't really have on entry fees and ammunition. All for a chance to prove that his technique wasn't just valid, it was superior. In the distance, the targets were being set up at various distances. 300 yards, 500 yards, and the final challenge at 800 yards. 13 targets in total, each one requiring precision that most shooters spent lifetimes trying to achieve. The afternoon wind was already picking up, adding another layer of difficulty. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Your grandfather is watching from heaven, Mijo. Make him proud." He smiled despite the pressure. His grandfather, James Chun, had been a Korean War veteran who had settled in Nebraska and built a life from nothing. He had taught Marcus that innovation wasn't disrespect, it was survival. The announcement crackled over the loudspeakers. "All competitors to the registration tent. Board meeting in 15 minutes. Decision pending on equipment and technique regulations." Sarah fell into step beside Marcus as he walked toward the tent. The crowd parted slightly, conversations dying down. Everyone knew what was at stake. If the board banned the barn beam shot, it would set a precedent that innovation in the sport would be stifled. If they allowed it, the traditional hierarchy would be challenged. Inside the tent, the air was thick with tension and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long. Board members sat at a folding table, their faces revealing nothing. Bill Harrison stood to the side, arms crossed, a slight smirk playing at his lips. He had already won, or so his posture suggested. Chairman Robert Mitchell cleared his throat. He was a fair man, Marcus knew, but also a traditionalist who valued the sport's heritage above all else. "We've received numerous complaints about unconventional shooting positions," Mitchell began, his Texas drawl filling the tent. Some believe these techniques undermine the integrity of competitive marksmanship. Others argue that evolution is necessary for the sport's growth. We're here to make a decision before today's competition begins. Marcus felt every eye in the tent shift to him. Bill Harrison stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden platform. "Gentlemen and lady," he nodded curtly toward Sarah, who was scribbling furiously in her notebook. "This isn't about innovation. This is about respect for a craft that men died perfecting. My brothers in arms, real soldiers, learned to shoot the right way, not perched on some barn like a damn scarecrow." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but forced himself to remain silent. His grandfather had taught him that the best response was results, not words. Harrison continued, warming to his subject. "The barn beam position gives an unfair advantage. It's not a natural shooting stance. In real combat, in real hunting situations, you don't have custom-built platforms. You have dirt, rocks, and your own 2 feet. This kid," he gestured dismissively toward Marcus, "is turning our sport into a circus act." The words stung more than Marcus wanted to admit. He had spent years perfecting his technique, studying physics and wind patterns, understanding how elevation and angle affected trajectory. It wasn't a gimmick. It was science applied to art. Chairman Mitchell raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Chun, you want to respond?" Marcus stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the tent. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Sir, with respect to Mr. Harrison and his service, innovation has always been part of shooting sports. The prone position was once considered radical. Adjustable stocks were controversial. Even the scopes we all use today were called cheating by purists. My technique comes from practical experience, from solving real problems on a working ranch." "That's all fine and good," Harrison interrupted, "but this is a competition with standards. Standards that have been in place for decades. You can't just show up and rewrite the rules because it suits you." "I'm not rewriting anything," Marcus replied, his voice gaining confidence. "The rulebook says competitors must maintain safe firing positions and demonstrate marksmanship skill. My position is safe, it's stable, and it works. Banning it because it's different isn't about standards, it's about fear of change." The tent erupted in competing voices. Some shouted in agreement with Harrison, others defended Marcus's right to compete. Sarah's camera flashed, capturing the moment for tomorrow's newspaper. Chairman Mitchell banged his gavel on the table repeatedly until order was restored. "The board will deliberate for 10 minutes, Mitchell announced. "All competitors, clear the tent." Outside, the Oklahoma wind carried dust devils across the empty range. Marcus walked to his truck, needing space to breathe. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his mother and a dozen supportive texts from friends back in Kansas City. But none of that mattered if he couldn't compete. Sarah found him leaning against the tailgate. "They're really going to ban it, aren't they?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from the set of her jaw. Sarah shook her head slowly. "Harrison has 3 votes locked in. Mitchell is on the fence. It's not looking good, Marcus." Marcus stared at the distant targets, their white faces mocking him in the afternoon glare. 8 hours of driving. Money he couldn't afford to lose. All for nothing because men like Harrison couldn't accept that there was more than one way to be excellent. The tent flap opened and Chairman Mitchell emerged alone. His expression was unreadable as he walked across the dusty ground toward Marcus's truck. Sarah immediately raised her camera, sensing something significant was about to happen. "Mr. Chun," Mitchell said, removing his hat and wiping his forehead. "The board has reached a decision. We're banning the barn beam technique effective immediately." The vote was 4-3. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Years of work, invalidated by a simple majority vote. He opened his mouth to respond, but Mitchell raised his hand. However, Mitchell continued, his weathered face breaking into an unexpected smile. "I'm overruling the board decision as chairman. It's within my authority for the first competition following a rules dispute. You're going to compete today, son. But here's the catch. You need to prove beyond any doubt that your technique has merit. Harrison has agreed to a challenge. If you can hit 13 targets in this afternoon session, using your barn beam method, the technique stays legal permanently. If you miss more than 2, it gets banned forever and you're suspended from regional competitions for a year. The terms hit Marcus like a physical blow. 13 targets. 2 misses maximum. In rising wind conditions. With every eye on the range watching for him to fail. It wasn't just his reputation on the line anymore. It was his entire future in the sport. Sarah lowered her camera, concern flashing across her face. Chairman, that's an impossible standard. Most experienced shooters would struggle with 11 out of 13 in these conditions. Mitchell replaced his hat, his expression hardening. Those are the terms. Harrison insisted. Either Mr. Chun proves his method is superior, or we end this debate permanently. What's it going to be, son? Marcus looked at his rifle case, then at the targets shimmering in the distance. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes you have to bet everything on what you believe in. That's not recklessness, that's faith. I'll do it, Marcus said quietly. If you believe he can pull this off, Sarah said to her camera, now recording, then you need to see how this ends. Subscribe to the Tribune Sports channel because this story is about to get incredible. One young shooter, one impossible challenge, and an entire sport watching to see if tradition or innovation wins today. Marcus began assembling his equipment, his hands moving with practiced precision. Around the range, word spread quickly. Competitors abandoned their own preparations to watch. This wasn't just another competition anymore. This was history being made or destroyed. The shooting platform Marcus had brought sat in his truck bed, a simple wooden structure that mimicked the barn beams from his grandfather's ranch. It took him 15 minutes to set it up at the firing line, every movement watched by dozens of silent spectators. Bill Harrison stood with his arms crossed, confident that this young upstart was about to learn a painful lesson about hubris. Marcus climbed onto the platform, settling into the elevated position that had become second nature to him. From this height, roughly 6 feet off the ground, the world looked different. The wind patterns were clearer, the sight lines unobstructed by ground-level heat shimmer. His grandfather had discovered this accidentally 50 years ago, and Marcus had perfected it through thousands of hours of practice. The first target stood at 300 yards, a standard paper bullseye that any decent shooter could hit. But Marcus knew that wasn't the point. This was about consistency under pressure, about proving that his technique wasn't luck but skill. He chambered around, controlled his breathing, and felt the world narrow to just him, the rifle, and the target. The wind pushed from the southwest at roughly 12 miles per hour. He made a minute adjustment to his scope, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range. Through his scope, Marcus saw the bullet punch through the center ring. Target 1, clean hit. A few scattered claps came from the crowd, quickly silenced by the tension. 12 more to go. Target 2 at 300 yards fell just as cleanly. Then target 3. Marcus moved with mechanical precision, his body and mind working in perfect harmony. The elevated position allowed him to read the wind better, to see subtle changes in the grass and dust that ground-level shooters missed. Target 4 at 500 yards required more calculation. The wind was increasing, swirling in unpredictable patterns. Marcus waited, watching, feeling. His grandfather used to say that great shooting was more about patience than speed. Wait for the wind to tell you its secrets, the old man would whisper. The bullet flew true. Target 4, center mass. 5, 6, 7. Each shot rang out with methodical certainty. The crowd had grown silent, even Harrison's smirk beginning to fade. Sarah's camera captured every moment, the story of the day writing itself with each perfect hit. Target 8 at 500 yards came with a gust that made Marcus pause. He waited 30 seconds, feeling the pattern, understanding the rhythm of the Oklahoma wind. When the moment came, he took it. Another perfect hit. 9 targets down. 4 remaining. All at 800 yards, the maximum distance for the competition. This was where champions were made or broken. The wind at that range was a living thing, unpredictable and cruel. Even the best shooters in the country struggled with consistency at this distance. Marcus wiped sweat from his eyes and loaded fresh rounds. Everything he had worked for came down to these final 4 shots. 800 yards. The distance where ballistics became more art than science, where every variable multiplied into chaos. Marcus studied the far targets through his scope, their white faces barely visible in the afternoon haze. His heart rate remained steady, trained through years of practice to stay calm when everything screamed at him to panic. Target 10 waited in the distance like a judgment. He calculated windage, elevation, the temperature drop as the afternoon wore on. His grandfather's voice came back to him. The rifle doesn't know about pressure, son. It only knows physics and your faith in yourself. Marcus settled into his position, feeling the wooden beam beneath him like an old friend. He had built this platform with his own hands, measuring every angle to match the barn beams where he had learned to shoot. The elevated position gave him a perspective that conventional shooters couldn't access, a view of wind patterns and air currents that transformed 800 yards from impossible to merely difficult. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil pushed against his shoulder, familiar and comforting. Through the scope, he watched the bullet's trace, saw it fight the wind and gravity, saw it punch through the center of target 10. The crowd erupted. Even those who had doubted him couldn't suppress their amazement. 10 perfect shots. 3 remaining. Harrison's face had gone pale, his certainty crumbling with each successful hit. Target 11 fell 30 seconds later. The wind had shifted slightly east, and Marcus adjusted without hesitation. Another center hit. The technique that had been called a gimmick, a circus act, was proving itself with undeniable precision. Sarah was practically bouncing on her feet, her camera working overtime. "This is incredible," she whispered to her recording device. 11 for 11. 2 shots left and Marcus Chun has already proven something extraordinary here today. Target 12 required everything Marcus had learned. The wind swirled unpredictably. The heat shimmer made the target dance and blur. He waited nearly 2 minutes, ignoring the impatient murmurs from the crowd, feeling for the perfect moment. When it came, he knew it in his bones. The shot rang out. Perfect hit. 12 down. 1 remaining. Marcus had already exceeded the requirement, had already proven his point beyond any reasonable doubt. But this last shot meant something more. This was for his grandfather, for every innovator who had been told their ideas were wrong simply because they were different. Chairman Mitchell's voice carried across the range. "Mr. Chun, you've already met the challenge. The final shot is optional." Marcus chambered his last round. "Nothing about this is optional," he called back. The 13th target stood alone in the distance, a final test of will and skill. Marcus breathed in the Oklahoma air, tasted victory and vindication, and let himself smile for the first time all day. He fired. The bullet flew straight and true, bisecting the target's center with surgical precision. 13 out of 13. Perfect. Impossible. Undeniable. 3 years later, the Heartland Precision Shooting Club looked different. Where dusty parking lots once held only pickup trucks, now buses brought students from across the country. The barn beam technique, once controversial, had become standard curriculum at shooting schools nationwide. Innovation had won, and the sport had grown because of it. Marcus stood on the new elevated training platforms, watching a group of young shooters practice the method he had fought so hard to legitimize. Among them was a 16-year-old girl from Arizona who had just qualified for nationals using the technique. Her father had driven 12 hours to train with Marcus, saying his daughter deserved to learn from the man who changed everything. Sarah Bennett approached, her press credentials now reading senior sports editor, Tulsa Tribune. She had won a regional journalism award for her coverage of that fateful afternoon. The photo of Marcus taking his 13th shot had become iconic in competitive shooting circles. "Big day tomorrow," she said, gesturing toward the new facility being constructed behind the range. The Marcus Chun Center for Innovative Marksmanship. "Your grandfather would be proud." Marcus smiled, touching the worn leather rifle case that still held his grandfather's initials. The center would offer free training to youth shooters, focusing on innovation and practical skill development. Funding had come from unexpected places, including a substantial donation from Chairman Mitchell, who had retired and become one of Marcus's strongest advocates. Even Bill Harrison had come around, grudgingly at first, then with genuine respect. The old veteran now helped teach at the facility, his traditional methods complementing Marcus's innovative approaches. He had admitted, over beers one evening, that his resistance had been about fear of his own obsolescence, not about protecting the sport. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the range, the same Oklahoma heat that had witnessed history 3 years ago. Marcus's construction job was a distant memory now. He ran his own training program, wrote columns for shooting magazines, and consulted with military units interested in unconventional positioning techniques. His phone buzzed with messages from former competitors, now friends, congratulating him on tomorrow's dedication ceremony. The sport had grown in ways nobody expected, attracting younger, more diverse participants who saw that excellence had many paths. Marcus looked at the 13 targets set up on the far range, a permanent memorial to that day. They would stay there forever, a reminder that courage and conviction could change not just a competition, but an entire culture. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it moved you, inspired you, or made you believe that one person can challenge the system and win, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think about standing up for what you believe in, and subscribe to see more true stories of underdogs who refuse to accept defeat. What story should I tell next? Let me know below. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the rifle in your hands, but the courage to use it differently than everyone else. Until next time, keep aiming higher.